We're live.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Worldviews Media. Robert Dakota here, bringing you Ty Goff of the upcoming event for Autumn Equinox, which is the Quantum Gate of Ma'at. We're working on part 2, and I'm going to let Ty take over from here. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, Ty, is from some of these conversations that I've been in on with Malcolm Bendall and Randall and all the guys. They talked a lot about the pyramids of Egypt and the sacred geometry there, which is what you're focusing on. And I'm looking forward to see if there's any overlaps with Malcolm Bendall's work and with what you're presenting. So why don't you take it over from there and start where you would like to start on part 2.
Thank you. So as far as my particular work in Egypt in relation to what Randall has been presenting, everything that he presents is quite awesome. I love listening to him. He's a great speaker. His events last a little long, but other than that, he's great. I know he's just got a lot of information, and it's hard to push it all out in a very easy, fast way. The one thing that where he and I are different is that he's very focused on the 4-3-2 pattern. We know that it's definitely part of sound. And he's, first it was Graham Hancock, I believe. I don't know that he was the originator, but someone brought it to his attention. And in one of his books, he talked about the 43,200 model that measures the Earth. And at that time, when he used that model and measured it, it did the polar radius to within about 10 miles. So quite good, you know, not perfect, but quite good. And then Randall picked up on that, and he added an extra dimension to the height of the pyramid, which he calls the socle. And the socle is, it's interesting because there are older maps that use that term, socle. But socle, if you actually look it up, what it means, it's typically like a small plate that's under a vase or something like that. So we're talking about something that's massively larger than that, for one thing. And Sir Flanders Petrie, who did all the measurements, one of the things that he talked about, he didn't call it a socle. He described it as a platform, because the way we see it today, we see most of those platform stones removed. And so in most cases, there's a place, especially right along the north face on the east side, where you still have some of the original casing stones. And you can see that it only extends so far out, maybe, 10, 12 inches. And then of course it drops. So if you were just looking at that, then you might have a sense that that's where that platform, or we can call it a socle, where it ended. But from the Egyptologist perspective, that platform extended quite a ways away from the pyramid. And when Graham Hancock talks about how amazing the Giza Plateau is, how flat it is and how level it is, 2 inches in the length of the pyramid. What Graham is actually talking, he's not talking about the bedrock. He's talking about the platform. The platform is leveled to 2 inches, but the actual bedrock goes from about 15 inches to about 27 inches. In other words, it's undulating. And so the platform flattened all of that out to a very precise degree. Now that ends up kind of throwing a monkey wrench in certain ideas, like that the Egyptians carved out, hey, my wife's making faces at me from the window, sorry. Anyways, carved out a section all the way around the perimeter and used water to level it. But that can't actually happen because the ground, as I said, is uneven, and it's the platform that is almost perfectly level. So that's the first thing. And that then ultimately may play a part in how you determine the actual height of the pyramid if you're trying to use the platform, or socle, as Randall is choosing to call it. Because depending on where you measure it, you get these various different measures. And they don't, and even when you average them, they don't average out quite to the same measurement that Randall's using. So, but I will say that by doing what Randall did, he was able to reduce that 10-mile difference down to about 2.6 miles. So that's really good in that way. My work, I use a completely different pattern. I'm like I said, 432 is not really my thing. I still work with 440. And there's a reason for that. It's because of it's one of its bases is base 11. And base 11 you find everywhere in Egypt. Base 432 is base 6. So it's a pattern based on 6. And of course it does all of these amazing things. The way I look at it is 432 is more kind of like in the realm of what you would describe as general relativity, if you were trying to make a comparison, where when you work in these other frequencies like base 11, base 17, which is a function of kingship, that number is specifically connected to kingship. Those patterns play the same role in measuring the earth. But I use them for measuring the circumference. And the measurements that, that I'm using actually measure the earth to within about 57 feet. And I have a couple of unity models that are just design based. In other words, like the 1114 unity model that is connected to the esoteric side of Christianity, the name Lord Jesus Christ in Greek. If you convert all the Greek letters into numbers, it creates a number 3168. If you times that by 10, it creates in miles the actual circle that squares the circle around the earth. And if you were to take that and reduce that or expand it to a global frame, you would find that Lord Jesus Christ's name measures the earth to within about 5 miles. But using what I call the spirit circle. In other words, the circle that's inside the square, that is actually the earth circle. And then you have this larger circle that's actually creating the pyramidal form. And that circle is what I call the spirit circle. So we know that that model is been used pretty extensively. We know that people choose pi as the actual number or the actual pyramid angle, and other people use the golden mean. But ultimately, the way I see it is there are these plus minus boundaries of tolerance. And when you recognize, if you've got 2 minutes, we'll say, on either side of whatever your base measurement is, 2 minutes of arc, then what you find is, well, there's a lot of different unity models and that are created by different pathways that come within that same 2 minutes of arc. And from my point of view, they're all accurate. So, you know, we can argue about, is there only one precise thing, or is this representing something that has a broader context? And from my point of view, it represents a greater context. And part of that is because Egypt's measuring system, it's really based on a dyad. It's based on 2 measures, not one. You need 2 measures actually, so the one can play off the other when you're doing long distances. If you only have one measurement, you really can't, there's no way to cross-check your work. But if you've got 2 different measures and they're only supposed to line up so periodically, you can figure out where you're deviating and you can make corrections. And that's what you find in Egypt. Now, the 2 measurements, most people are, of course, familiar with the royal cubit It was originally, when it was first discovered in modern times, back in the 1600s by John Greaves, he called it the Memphis cubit because he found this measurement all around the Memphis area, and the Memphis area is where all the pyramids are in Egypt. But he also discovered another measure that was slightly longer by about a few inches, which he named it the sacred cubit. And of course, Egyptology currently does not acknowledge it as an Egyptian-born measurement, nor do they acknowledge that it actually existed on the Giza Plateau at the time the pyramids were built. But what's going to happen during this disclosure experience is people are going to find out that, in fact, it absolutely connects with the pyramids and the Giza Plateau. And it's these two measurements together that play off each other, not only to measure the mean circumference of the Earth, but through a conversion formula, can convert them to the polar the polar circumference using both measures, and the equatorial circumference. And those are accurate to within about a third of a mile. So mean pretty much dead on, 57 feet. And then I've got a couple of design-based drawings, so they're just purely design. And those will measure to within about 36 feet of modern satellite measures. And it's just a pure design, but you just scale it up to a global frame and you're within 37 feet. So these are pretty spectacular numbers as far as how that all works. And that will be one of the things that we'll dive into in quite a bit of depth when we do measuring the Earth part, which is on the second day morning. Of course, the first day and the first evening, that's going to be about just building the Giza Plateau pyramid complex, and show how that really it's not just the three pyramids that are doing this amazing thing, but actually it's also all the ancillary stuff that's on the Giza Plateau. It's also following these same mathematical unity models. And this is something, of course, that Egyptology is unaware of. And their big ask, we'll say, that they've always asked, the alternative side is, well, now the way they would put it is, well, where are the pottery shards? Where are the, basically they're just saying, where's the artifacts that substantiate that the knowledge of pi that's built into the Great Pyramid is not just a romanticized mathematical coincidence, as they, that's the PC way of saying it today. Back in the 1800s, if you believed in stuff and they had discounted you, they just called you a pyramidiot. But today they're much kinder. Oh, that's a romanticized mathematical coincidence. Well, the thing is this romanticized mathematical coincidence extends throughout the entire history of Egypt, and it's in everything. So that's going to change, and it already has. For like I mentioned in the last talk, that we have 4 different Egyptologists that I sat down with. They were from ages in their early 30s up to in his mid 70s, and he'd been on the Giza Plateau his entire life. He lives in the Mena village. I spent some time at his house showing my work, and he had 2 comments. The first comment was, "Who are you?" And the second comment was, "You have a treasure." This treasure is what I want to reveal to the whole world. The mathematics tie directly into the imperial system of measurements that we used right up until the moment that we created the metric system. And of course, in the United States, and I think there's one other country that's still using the imperial system of measures. But back in the day, when Piazzi Smythe and John Taylor made these statements about the sacred cubit being a certain size, and it was within 1,000th of an inch of creating the British inch. They didn't know about the conversion formula, and they didn't. So the actual polar sacred cubit, it's actually 9/100,000ths of an inch off of the imperial inch. In other words, it's synonymous, they're the same. But this is part of the thing, you know, if you don't have the whole story and you only have a part of it, it's easy for people to kind of undermine the direction you're trying to move in. And that's what has happened for the last about 150 years, since we've had, you know, people putting forward some pretty serious ideas about what was going on in Egypt. And the one thing, of course, that these guys in the 1800s, no one wanted to give the Egyptians credit, even back then. They didn't want. They just like, no, they're barbarians. And, you know, there's no way that this was their idea or their belief or their construction. And I personally, I don't know how to respond to that particular idea. When you see the level of coherence on the Giza Plateau, when you see that you can't separate one thing out, you kind of have to take the whole Giza Plateau back 12,000 years or whatever. Or if you're saying, well, 3/4 of this is definitely the Egyptians, like Hinimus, who's the supposed architect of the Great Pyramid, where it's located and how it plays off of where it is in relation to the Great Pyramid, which creates another unity model. And you look at Kentawis's town and how it's aiming directly at the center of this massive field that's over 5 miles in diameter. And you look at Mastaba T, which is another, it's in the south. Petrie originally drew it directly in alignment with the center of the Great Pyramid. It turns out it's about 165 feet off of that line.
So can we go back to the measurements before we change gears? So, because for most people, they're not so into the math as you are. And so their question is going to be, so what? What's the value in, you know, I know you're really focused on the numbers but what's the overall like big picture for the average person of why this math is important to them and getting it right?
Well, essentially what's happening in the world today is you see this massive polarization between people and their belief systems. And because of that, you can see in certain places kind of where it had already developed long before what's actually happened since 2020. There were already big splits, and between Egyptology and the alternative theorists is one of those places where there's a huge rift between the two different ideologies. And for myself, it just did not feel right to me that things should be so, you know, almost, you know, the kind of anger that, you know, I'll mention, if I mention a certain name, people, they'll freak out, you know, and then you start talking about, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize, blah, blah. But in regards to the numbers and why they're so important, it comes down to also where we are in today from a technological point of view. Numbers may not mean a whole lot to the everyday person. I'm a builder, so of course they mean something to me, but not everybody builds things. But if you're creating machinery, for example, or if you're creating a plasmoid generator, you know, mathematics is very important. And of course, with Bendel's work, bringing this idea of being able to capture and scavenge the emissions that come off of a motor and convert it into plasmoids, re-inject it, and get a 50% gain in either efficiency or power, depending on how you want it, how you're using it. And also coming out with a new emission that's practically zero emission. That's a huge big deal. And along with Marco Rodin and his Rodin coil, I did a little bit of research on his stuff as well. Both Bendel and Marco work with the number 9, and The number 9, of course, is also in Egypt. It's part of the Ennead in Heliopolis, their creation story. There's nine beings that are created as part of that story. And of course, the numbers that Bendel specifically mentioned, which was 45, 450, 4,500, which he was playing off of the Hebrew fire letters in their final version, which there's 27 of, not the 22 the proto version of the Hebrew language written. I saw, wow, I go, well, I work with those numbers specifically, and those numbers are actually on the Giza Plateau. So to me, him saying that, and then me go, well, I absolutely know what those numbers are, and he'll be surprised to see exactly how important they were to the Egyptians, or to whoever created the Giza Plateau pyramid complex. Like I said in the first talk, I don't have a vested interest in it being one way or the other. To me, I'm just an evidence-based guy. You know, show me something that's real, and I get it. You know, if it's just a story, then I'll look at it and I'll consider it, and I'll see if I can find other ways to plug it in to where it can make sense. So I'm open, and I leave it open to everybody to make their own choices. But as far as in the case of, like I said, technology, number is critical. And the thing about the measuring system of the ancients is that it was based on 2 measures. We don't do that today. Today, we just, you know, when they decided to create a universal measuring system, which became the metric system, they said, okay, we're going to use the Earth, and we're going to divide it into 40 million pieces around the polar circumference. And the 1/40 millionth of it is going to be the meter. And they used all the biggest scientific minds on the planet at that time to calculate what the size would be. And when they calculated it, of course, we didn't have satellites. So everybody was using it, everybody's excited about it. And then we put satellites up, and lo and behold, they were off by 7 kilometers when you actually used it to measure the Earth. So then you had 3 more changes. Of course, and the last change was that they plugged it into the frequency that light travels at. And of course, after they did that, in about 2015, they discovered that light doesn't actually have a singular speed. While it does generally travel at a singular speed, when it moves through certain objects, it slows down. And when it comes out, it stays slowed down. So it's kind of weird. And the thing is the Egyptians, they didn't do it that way. Everything was frequency based. It was harmonics based. And they would adjust the base length rather than, because then they could keep the frequencies always the same. It would be so much simpler. You know, if you had the same measurement for the polar circumference, the mean, and the equatorial, and all you were doing was you were using conversion formula like I mentioned, and you're just changing the base length, then everything stays the same. It's super easy to keep track of in your mind. It's something you can walk around with and you can understand it. And that's something that we can't do now. And so a lot of what the ancients actually knew is being lost in number, because you've got numbers like 230.325 meters. Well, I mean that, and then the next one is some other crazy number that's not even a whole number. I mean, so there's no attunement between the modern measure and the ancient measure, as far as if we're actually going to be exploring ancient cultures. It would be good if we used the ancient culture's own measures, because then we would gain more understanding. But if we're using our modern measure to measure everything, then you're missing all the harmonics. And that's something to me that has been escaping a lot of the information that's been coming out. And that's something that I feel strongly about correcting. And because I believe that will open up a whole new avenue for exploration in using this as an actual modern technology. You know, we're building molecules. All of a sudden, the squaring the circle model becomes infinitely important, because and these various pathways that create slightly different versions become very important, because it may turn out that a certain pathway actually holds a key to a particular healing process, whereas another one might connect to, you know, a particular type of technological avenue versus, you know. And so to me, this is why I believe that not only does my work do what happened to the Maya. See, I don't know, I'm not sure how many people know this story that I'll just share. It's just 5 minutes, but
can I insert a question real quick before you go
there?
there? Don't forget your thought. You got it? You got it?
I won't.
Okay.
Because it's about Maya.
So essentially, the importance of getting the math precise and having the blueprint of the Giza Plateau with the pyramids that has a backup or a secondary checking system to check your math is sort of a superior math. And if you can tune into that, you can not only tune into the blueprint of the Giza Plateau, but perhaps other blueprints of other pyramids around the planet.
I'm sure. I'm sure of it. There's no reason, you know.
But and then further, if you can tap into that blueprint can also, what I heard you referring to, when the maths start overlapping, like with the Malcolm Bendall projects and medicines and those numbers and those blueprints sort of have some overlap there in many different disciplines.
They do.
So that's what I think, you know, is the key importance of, you know, what I would say to people on the math, because math, you know, goes kind of over that kind of math kind of goes over my head. But
Luckily,
I can see patterns, I can see design, I can see shape. When you start talking frequency and dimension, then it starts to pull together for me. So I'm just trying to point out that what you're bringing forward has applications across disciplines and could open up some answers for mysteries that we've had.
Well, keep in mind that I'm a visual geometrist. I don't use analytical geometry. The Egyptians did not use analytical geometry. The Greeks are the ones that created analytical geometry, but the Greeks did not know what the number 17 meant to the Egyptians and why it was so important to them. So it was obvious that information was not taught to them, regardless of who it was, including Pythagoras, because Pythagoras himself really judged the number 17. So much so that if you go to Italy today, the number 17 takes on the same connotation as the number 13 in the US. You know, back in the 60s, you go into a hotel that's got more than 13 floors and you go in the elevator, there's no number 13 to push because people are so freaked out about it. And in Italy, it's the same with the number 17, which is interesting. So the reason why, so the story that I want to bring forward real quick is this one about what happened at the beginning of when the Mayanologists, the first archaeologists that showed up, and my wife and I and a friend, we went to Palenque. This was back in the, I don't know, it was probably around 1990. While we were there, we met a man named Moses. Now, he was a Mayan elder, and he was probably around 70 or so. I mean, he looked good. It was hard to tell. I mean, he could have been older. I'm not really sure. And every day after we'd go around our sites and stuff, we were staying at his place, and he would tell us stories. And he told us this one story. And the story is that back in the late 50s, what was happening was people were discovering so much stuff. The guys who were out in the field, they would do the tracings and everything, and they didn't have time to convert it all into information and to put it out to the public. So they would give it to their friends who were colleagues or academics that could then take that and put it into a format that could be taught to university students and things like that. Well, there was a man, I don't remember his name, but he's on the internet, you can look him up. He's a Russian mathematician, and he was also a teacher. And he started noticing things in the glyphs. He started noticing astronomical information in the glyphs. He started seeing different calendar systems in the glyphs. These are things that weren't actually known yet. And so he had a small group of students that were following his work, and he was teaching them how to read the glyphs the way that he was reading. He was interpreting them very differently than at that time what the rest of the Mayanologists were interpreting them as. And so there was a conference, just like how they do with Egyptology, just like how we do with, the alternative theorists coming together, doing the big symposiums, just like Earth Origins 5, similar to that, only it was their version. And apparently many students, and Moses, this gentleman that told me the story, he was one of them at that time. He was getting his PhD in Mayanology, but he was a follower of this particular Russian math teacher. And so what happened was, he said that after every speaker would talk, when it was time for questions, one of these or more of these students would be the first one at the podium to ask questions. And they would just drill the people that were on stage. And basically, it became so rambunctious that they had to shut down the conference. Now, what came out of that was they had to rewrite all of the history of the Maya. So all the books that were written, they had to be discarded and they had to start over. With this new information, with all what we know now today about how amazing the Mayans were with their mathematics, with their medicines, with their astronomy, and of course their architecture. So my work I see as doing something similar. I'm not suggesting that, I'm super amazing in any particular way, but what it does is every single Egyptologist that saw it, they saw something that they'd never even believed existed. And they changed instantly. Once, because, after an hour and a half of just one after another thing over and over throughout the entire 3,000-year history, showing the same mathematical patterns, repeating themselves over and over again, hidden in plain sight, for anyone that was paying attention or knew how to look for it would find, it changed their entire belief system. And by doing that, I believe what's going to end up happening is the man, Champollion, he was the one that's given the lion's share of the credit for deciphering hieroglyphs. And I watched a documentary, which I have not ever been able to find since that time that I watched it. It was probably 15 years ago or more. And in it, he was showing all the things, how he kind of figured things out. And he then went to Egypt and took his students, and they were retranslating all of these different beliefs. And it really changed the nature of Egyptology. But during these travels, he was talking with one of his main students, and he goes, there's something here that I'm missing. He goes, I can't put my finger on it, but I know there's something deeper here. He figured out the determinatives, and that really made a huge difference in how you are able to read hieroglyphs, because a determinative actually, it's a hieroglyph that has no sound or name to itself, but it actually informs who's reading what of the many definitions the hieroglyph next to it is. So he discovered that, and that made a giant deal, but he couldn't figure it out. And it's because he didn't know the geometry. He didn't realize there was a geometric set that underlied everything he was looking at. He was sure he was looking at something, there was something there, but he didn't know what it was. And so my hope is, of course, that this work will go out and it will reach into people's belief systems and help keep them in a more kind of a centric space, not so too far in any particular direction, and be able to actually see the Egyptians in a different light than how they're currently being portrayed. Typically, people look at them as just kind of very superstitious, taking advantage of other cultures' information, but not really understanding it. And that's not how the artwork and the architecture, it's not really what is actually, it's not really what's actually shown. It's just not been known. And so it's allowed people to make a lot of statements that are not, they won't survive after my work comes out. There's just, and it's just how it is. There's nothing I can do about it. It's because there is a fundamental reality to what they actually knew, and they practice it from before dynastic Egypt began. And as I said in the past, I don't know how far you can take that same knowledge set and push it. Can you push it all the way back to, 12,000 BCE? Maybe. No one's done it yet, but no one even knows what the pattern is. So the first set is just to get it established, recognize it on the Giza Plateau and in Egypt as a something. And then from there, that can be moved cross-culturally to Mesopotamia, see how far they can take it. You can move over to Turkey. You can go down into Morocco and those places, Libya. Maybe you can jump over to South America and Central America, and for sure at Teotihuacan, obviously, because it's got the same base dimensions as the Great Pyramid. It just plays a different mathematical model. Even though the square and the circle model is still there, it's just somewhat hidden. It's a very cool layout, and that'll be shown on the last day when we do quantum gates around the world. But anyway, so that's a story that I wanted to put forward because the Maya is really kind of once I put out this in Egypt, I'm going to start moving to a different cultural paradigm and start checking for it there. So that's where I'm at with that.
All right. Do you have any questions, Alberto or Jacob?
Well. I mean, it is a fantastic work you've been doing, Ty. Congratulations.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to tell you that the world academia is absolutely controlled. They don't want independent astronomers or geometrists, sniffing around, trying to find out who we are, where do we come from, and where are we supposed to be going to. All of these eventually, I'm talking about Pythagoras. Pythagoras was a priest. Mathematics is a priesthood.
Absolutely.
Architecture is a priesthood.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's the language of God. And there is an old adagio in Spanish that says, constructions, architecture is the unbribable witness of a civilization. And that's what they are.
I love that.
And stones are speaking. Jesus Christ was asked, Lord says, you're speaking out to us, but what about when you're gone? Says, my apostles will speak on my behalf. And what's going to happen when your apostles are gone? Says, the stones will speak on my behalf. And that prophecy is currently happening.
Absolutely.
In addition to that, the Bible tells you that everything has a measure, has a weight, and God knows every single of its creation by its name.
Of course.
So those guys that call us, I've been called a pyramidite, but I told them, well, you're a pyramignorant. So that's what they are.
That's pretty funny.
They were, I'm a rebel. I'm a born rebel, man. And I don't longer listen to them. I don't longer fear them. That was 30 years ago, you know, when government has absolute control on everything you do. I've been very bold and very daring in the past, let's say 20 years, 15 years, when it comes to speaking the truth out. And when it comes to archaeastronomy, which is what I've been practicing for almost 40 years, archaeastronomy is a multidisciplinary activity. We do construction, history, healing, we research on music, it's multi-disciplines.
Sure.
They all bind together. And believe me, I am very acquainted with every single topic you've gone through, because it is a mirror image of what's been going here with the Mayas. And I need to know, when are you gentlemen going to catch a plane and come to the UK? Because we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, for myself, interesting that you brought that up, because my wife and I have been talking about going down to Tulum and taking a look around there. We went long ago to do that kind of, you know, just traveling, checking things out. At that time, I was drawing, but I was unfocused, we'll just say. I was just, whenever I saw something, I recognized, oh, there's a pattern in there. I'd grab it, you know, and I would decipher it. So I've got a bunch of that. It's just kind of stuff to the side. So that'll all come out. A lot of my older works that I did long before I jumped hardcore into Egypt. The reason why I focused specifically on Egypt really is because of the Giza Plateau originally. But what I found as I would discover certain things, it was like I was just slightly behind the curve. I'd worked out where the Great Pyramid and the Third Pyramid were. I knew about the larger field. I'd figured out most of it, but the second pyramid was still eluding me. And I hadn't put my attention on the Sphinx yet. And so I'd gone to first I went to the CPAC conference in 2016. And that's kind of like the beginning of me, like kind of reaching out just to kind of see what's out there, who's doing what. And then in 2017 early, there was a conference in Sedona, and that's where I met Robert originally, along with Robert Bivol, Dr. J.J. Hertek, Robert Schock, and William Henry, and several other people that were all part of that conference. I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it was Cosmic Origins.
Was that the original Cosmic Origins?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, well, anyway, but here's the thing, you know, I was all excited because I had worked out where the Great Pyramid and Third Pyramid were. Well, everybody was only interested in the Sphinx in that moment. So it was like, oh, okay, bad timing. And I realized, well, I hadn't put my attention on the Sphinx. And so what happened was, I started looking at it, and of course, the AERA, Mark Leonard's group that runs the Giza Plateau Mapping Project, he was one of the directors. Well, I don't know if he was a director, but he was one of the main guys in the original Sphinx Mapping Project. And of course, you know, they put out these periodicals, and they also put out their own diagrams, etc. And he'd put out one of the Sphinx, the Forward Solar Temple, and Khafre's Valley Temple that sits beside the Solar Temple. And I was looking at it, and it had a north arrow on it. And when I looked at it, I go, well, that north arrow it's not, if it's pointing north, then the Sphinx is not looking east, not directly east. It was off by about 2.5 degrees. And so because of that, my brain went, well, if it's not looking at the sun on the spring equinox, what is it looking at? And basically, and this has happened to me several times, and it has happened because of Mark Leonard's work that's gone out, where I found a mistake and it led me to a great discovery. So I can't not give him credit, even though it's kind of a weird way to get it. But as it turned out, I told my wife, I go, look, I can't put my work out and tie it to the Sphinx if I don't know precisely if the Sphinx is really looking directly east or if it's really off by this 2.5 degrees because of this north arrow on this page. And she just kind of looked at me like, what? And I go, yeah. I go, we're going to have to go to Egypt. She goes, wait a minute, let me understand this. We're going to fly to Egypt. You have no way to get a hold of anybody. You're going to magically meet who you need to, and you're going to get the information you need so that you can work out, you can locate the Sphinx properly on the Giza Plateau. And I said, exactly. So that's what we did. We got there. We stayed just in Giza. We stayed at the Mena House, which is right next to the Great Pyramid. I ended up meeting a bookseller. He's had a bookstore since forever. I don't know, 50 years, 60 years. Every night we would talk and I'd show him my work and he was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. This is really amazing. And I told him why I was there. Well, one night I walked down and we'd been there 7 days. I only got 2 more days and I got to go. And I hadn't connected with who I felt I needed to. And he goes, hey, Zai Hawass is upstairs eating dinner. Go up there and ask him, And I'm like, well, I can't just walk up to Zai Hawass and ask him, a question, And he goes, no, you don't understand. Me as an Egyptian, I can't walk up to him and ask him anything. He's like a god, for the Egyptian community. He goes, but you as a tourist, you can just go up and ask, So it's like, okay, Ty, grow a pair, walk up there, go ahead and ask your question. So that's what I did. I walked up, introduced myself. And he had broken his leg or his hip. So he was in a wheelchair, which kind of sucked too. I asked my question. I started talking about the Sphinx and I didn't even get to talking about it being off, and blah, blah. And he goes, do you know Mark Leonard? And I go, well, I know who he is. And he goes, well, do you want his phone number? And I go, yes. So he gave me his phone number. I then, thank you very much, left. And then I called up Mark Leonard the next morning. It turned out it was his son's birthday. And of course, the very first question he asked was, how'd you get my phone number? And I go, well, I got it from Zai Hawass. Oh, okay. Well, what do you want to know? Very friendly. I told him the story about this paper and how the North Arrow was off. And he goes, well, how big is the paper? And I go, it's just, it's an 8.5 by 11. He goes, well, that doesn't mean anything. And I at the time, of course, I'm not going to be rude and go, well, yes, it does. Because I didn't want to be argumentative. I still needed to get the rest of the information I was looking for, which is how to locate the Sphinx precisely on the Giza Plateau. Because Petrie did not do that. It was still not uncovered when Petrie did all his measurements of the 3 pyramids, which is pretty much what everybody uses today for doing geometric research on the Giza Plateau. The way it played out was, he goes, well, Glenn Dash is actually the surveyor, and I will connect you to him through email. And I go, perfect. And so, I talked to him for about 45 minutes or so, explained a bunch of stuff. And then I went back home. I got the call or got an email from Glenn Dash. He said that he would give me his, at that time, they were unpublished survey numbers for the Sphinx. It was part of a beta test. He was kind of checking. There was a couple other people that had some really keen insights that he wanted to share that information with. But at the same time, because this is all through email, I also mentioned that, oh, by the way, the 3rd pyramid that you show on all of your maps is displaced by about 65 feet. And, and I thought, because Petrie had made a mistake, not in his main measurements or anything, but when he actually was converting them into angles and proportions so that you could measure it a different way, he inverted a couple of numbers and it changed that. And it turned out that the 3rd pyramid was in the spot where it would be if you made that mistake. But he was actually quite upset. You could tell it was very curt, his email back. And I just went, well, I go, no, I'm not saying that you guys really specifically made a mistake. I'm just saying that there is this mistake. And, and it took about 10 to 15 emails back and forth. And he said, and he was at one point, he just admitted, he goes, look, no, we did not measure where this, the third pyramid was and put that on. We were given an old government survey because we were in a hurry to create a master grid to put all of, and annotate where all the things that we were discovering all over the Giza Plateau. We needed a catalog, and we needed that map to catalog everything to. He goes, in hindsight, it probably would have been a good idea to actually have measured it to make sure that it's in the right spot. And they have since made a correction on their stuff. And in fact, interesting, because I was just in Egypt with Rebecca in this last November, went with William Henry, and then the second tour was with Archaeological Paths, because I wanted to see the difference in how things were being communicated between the alternative history theorists and the conservative theorists. I wanted an understanding of how that was working. I met actually directly with Mark Leonard before it was on the phone, and you could tell, he said, I've got a pile, stacked like so, in a legal folder box of at least a couple of dozen theories about how the Giza Plateau is laid out. And he goes, and it's got a lot of circles and a lot of triangles. And I kind of chuckled inside. I go, well, I'm not going to bother showing you my work right now, obviously. But when I told him the story about Glenn Dash and how there was that mistake, and it was me that found it, and me that found the mistake with the Sphinx and the North Arrow, which it turned out it was a mistake of the North Arrow. It was that the Sphinx is actually oriented directly east. But it still told me what the Sphinx is looking at besides the sun. And that was still totally worth it. But Mark, at first he was kind of he was cordial, but when I told him what Glenn told me, he looked at me, and it took him about 10 minutes to respond completely to it. He goes, Glenn really told you that? I go, I've got it in an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. And then he lightened up and shared a bunch of information. And ultimately he just goes, look, just put your work out. If it catches fire, great. So he didn't seem to have any real, he did come from the belief when he first came to Egypt that he followed Casey's work. So he was there to actually prove that the Atlanteans built the Great Pyramid. He just, in his own mind, wasn't able to do that. So he converted, essentially. But nonetheless, I have to believe that, in his heart of hearts, he's kind of hoping that someone's going to pull a rabbit out of their hat and show something that's beyond almost comprehension of the level of sophistication that the Egyptians did. But currently he sees everything on the Giza Plateau as sort of ad hoc, that because he sees one king tearing part of something, or it didn't finish it, another king adding what they wanted onto it later, and that kind of thing. And I go, well, after 47 years, and if that's all you're looking at, yeah, you would probably come up with that for your idea of how it worked. But the math and the alignments, I'm not an archaeoastronomer, but I do have Starry Night Pro. I've had 6, 7, and 8. I do use it in relation to Egypt. I've not looked at other cultures at all, so it's definitely not Maya. So I wouldn't be able to talk about anything around Maya and that kind of thing. And so I acquiesce to you for that. But nonetheless, there's some pretty striking things that are going on in the heavens during the historical timeline that Egyptologists say the Egyptians were involved in building pyramids. And that doesn't mean that it takes away from any other archaeoastronomy that plays to a different timeline. It's just that there's a massive amount of archaeoastronomy evidence that plays directly to the 3,000 years that Egypt existed as a country.
Okay, well, that wraps up our time for tonight. We'll pick up the next one on the next Zoom, which I think will be somewhere in this first week of September.
Yeah, I think so.
But
I think
we'll
at least by the 10th, but we know we can do it on a
Yeah.
Tuesday. You mentioned Tuesdays are always a great day to do it.
yeah.
So we'll pick whatever is the most convenient one right in there.
Okay.
Do our last. And I do still want to connect with Dan somehow to talk to him about how to retrofit the generators. As I told you before, we've got a couple of them. And even though we'll be traveling and won't be back I'm leaving next week. We're going to Bimini. Becca's doing a training. We'll also do some swimming with dolphins. You have to have your fun time too. And then back, and then ultimately, of course, come back for about half a week, and then we're off to Sedona to be with you and do this big presentation. And then I've got to go see my family for a reunion. But after we arrive back in October 2nd, I believe, I'm ready to jump on making something happen here on Maui. I had mentioned to you that on Maui, now that they've got enough resources coming in, like food, clothing, things like that, people need actually generators because there is no power. It's gone. There is no power. There's no infrastructure there to be able to use for any kind of power generation, which means you can't run any tools, you can't charge your tools if you've got, cordless tools to clean up even. So I see this as a huge, really opportunity to help people out in a demonstrable way. If you've got a 50% boost either in power or in efficiency, and you're talking about $120 or something, it seemed like what I heard, for a small generator, as far as parts go to retrofit it. That's something that people can do. And it's even something that, we could probably go for funding to maybe get enough material on site here on Maui that we can convert, 500 generators.
That would be cool.
Because it needs to be impactful, you know what I mean? To create some more data here on Maui. But, most of Maui's power, besides, so we've got about, the 10% plus that are homes. So home solar systems, they're most of them are grid tied. So that produces up to about 10% of Maui's power. Then you have a few two wind farms. They produce some small percentage. I don't know quite how much. But the majority of the power is diesel generators, large diesel generators. And this is, again, another place where Bendel's work, that would require something more than just a simple retrofit, more than likely. You probably, because it's so huge, you probably have to make sure you got the right diameter pipes, the right lengths, and the right spherical space, and the right, everything that goes to it. So I don't know how that all would play out, but if we can prove it at the small level, I have friends that have connections with Maui Electric, and then that might open up another door to help Maui. And obviously it helps the world, because it would become a space where it can be pointed at maybe in a larger context than just, individuals here and there that have been able to do this thus far, something that's much larger, broader. And so so I'm up for it, like I said, once I get back, but it won't be until early October. So I just want to put that out there, because it's something it would be really valuable and meaningful for the people here on Maui if we could do something. If they can save 50% of their gas, when they've lost everything, including all their money, except for what were in banks. But everything that they had, safes, that kind of thing, a lot of that was destroyed or vandalized, unfortunately. So it would be really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. And then it also, give another validation for the value for the sacred geometry and understanding the math.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again. Very excited, disclosure experience. It's going to be awesome. It is not just math. There's a lot, because you don't see, when you look at the geometry is hidden. It's hidden in plain sight, but it's still hidden. It's built into, well, here, if I just stand up slightly. So this shirt, so that is King Akhenaten. He was the first king to claim he was a pharaoh. So I always believed that when the Bible talks about the Pharaoh of Egypt, they were talking about Akhenaten. There's a story that is pretty compelling that may play out during the disclosure experience. But that particular thing, his face, from his heart, where his arms are crossed, from his heart to the top of the crown on the top of his head, all those mathematics and the pyramid that it creates and the 5-pointed star on his face, if you reduce it by 4 point in other words, the larger is 4.4 times the size of the smaller, and then you just put the smaller on his face and it recreates just his face. Now, how did an artist do that? You know what I mean? I mean, that's really sophisticated, and yet these are 2D images that have been carved into a three-dimensional form of being. How did they do that? Because I'm pretty sure everyone believes that the Egyptians carved we're way into the middle of Egypt. We're in the 18th dynasty now. So Egypt has been alive for a couple thousand years by then. So anyway, so there's a lot of imagery that is actually pictures and artwork that actually shows the same level of intelligence being expressed, but it's so it's not just math. And the bottom line is it's visual geometry. It's not, I only use a calculator just to prove, like when we measure the earth.
Letters are to words what numbers are to geometrical shapes.
Yes.
It's a language.
Yes.
It's a language. And
I understand that.
and it all relates directly to two main benefits for humankind. One is free energy, and the other one is staying healthy all the time. So these are the two biggest secrets against the large world corporations when it comes to energy, because they say we are energy slaves. And the other one is the pharmaceutical industry. Those two big secrets are hidden in the sacred geometry in Egypt, as well as in Mayan world.
Well, thank you, Alberto, for coming on, and I was grateful that I could share the story about my experience when I was down in the Mayan space.
I thank you very much, and congratulate you again. You do actually have a big treasure with you. And Robert, thanks again for considering me to having spent this fantastic time now. Learn a lot, and I can see that we have a lot to share too that has in common with the Mayans when it comes to number 17. Also, when it comes to measuring systems, yes, they do got two of them. That's part of the decor we have, and it really will also blow your mind to know how all that work in Mayan world. I hope we can soon get together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And Robert, thank you so much for turning this on and giving me an opportunity to put my voice out into the world. I've been saving it for years and years, but it's time to let it out and let it go. for me, you know, just to have that opportunity to give out to the world in a very professional way, which is what you're providing for me, Robert. Thank you so much.